The first time I saw her was when she had just stepped out of the red pickup truck squeezed between the moving van and the driveway of the house next door. She tiptoed past the burly men hauling furniture in her hand, looking around the garden. The light breeze elevated the shimmer strands of her blonde hair that so complemented her peach complexion. The light breeze played with the lacy hemline of her white sundress. The corners of her soft pink lips perked into a faint smile as she inspected the front garden, bending down to smell a flower poking out of the overgrown grasses. The moment I laid eyes on her, the basketball that I had been shooting hoops with plummeted from my hands onto the ground, where it rolled out of sight. She didn't seem human, more like an ethereal mirage flitting through reality, close yet untouchable. All I could do was stare. Prior to puberty, I had never noticed girls before, but now I couldn't be in a room with one I liked without devolving into an inarticulate mess. I'd resigned myself to the reality that I'd never have a chance with her, but fate seemed determined to push us together. The first time we talked was a week after she and her father had moved in. I had been outside, pushing the old smoke-belching lawnmower across our yard. As it juddered to a halt, I wiped the back of my hand across my soaked brow. Suddenly, an uneasy feeling prickled down my spine, the unmistakable sensation that I was being watched. "Hi." I almost died when I saw the girl standing there. I became acutely aware of the old t-shirt I wore, darkened with large sweat patches, my mind grinding to a halt as I tried to think of something that wouldn't make me sound like a complete idiot. Allison shrank, hiding her blush behind a raised hand. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," she began. I attempted a nonchalant wave. "What? No, no. Just doing chores, that's all." She gnawed her bottom lip. "It's just, I've seen you around before, but I've never got the chance to talk to you. It's been a really long time since I've lived with anyone my age. I mean, I don't even know your name." The pounding of blood in my skull from my overworked heart was almost deafening. Toby," I stammered out, and tucked a stray golden strand of hair behind her ear. "Allison." Her gaze dipped below my face to my chest, to the half-faded Ramones band logo. "I like your shirt," she remarked. "Really?" I cringed at how my voice cracked in that moment, but Allison didn't seem to mind at all. "I really like that band too. My dad has all their albums." "Allison!" Our heads had both perked up in the direction of where the muffled roar had come from, and saw a tall, bespectacled man whose face was wrinkled into a withering glare. His pale blue eyes seemed to pierce right through me, lips curled into a half-grimace. Allison went white as a sheet. "I'm sorry," she told me. I have to go." "Wait, She scurried inside the house, followed by the loud slam of the front door, leaving me staring dumbfounded. I wasn't the only one in town attracted to Allison. Once enrolled in our school, she attracted both the admiration of the boys and the seething envy of the girls. She never flaunted herself, instead hiding behind heavy textbooks, as if she was embarrassed by her own beauty. Guys flocked to her, drawn in by both her looks and the aura of enigma that surrounded her, but every time, she turned them down. There was one male presence that had dominated her life: her father, the terrifying man I had seen inside the house. When her peers had been out drinking and having fun, she always had to be home around 6, as per her father's curfew. He forbade her from joining any school clubs and from participating in gym because of a medical condition. She didn't have any social media profiles, but the one unbreakable rule that heralded over all others was that she could not date. I wondered how she hadn't run away or gone completely insane. Most of her admirers lost interest after the second or third rejection, repelled away by the rules that dominated her life. Bryce, however, was different. He was our school star quarterback. He was broad-shouldered with chocolate brown curls, the kind of boy that gave girls heart palpitations. He was aware of his own good looks too, dating a new girl every week. Rumors swirled that he slept with half the female student body. So, when Allison had arrived, he had to have her. She had turned him down, like she had done with all the others, disregarding his popular status. But Bryce hadn't been fazed. The very next day, he tried again, only to be met with the same response. Still, he didn't give up. He was the kind of person who had grown up with every luxury at his fingertips. No one had ever denied him anything until this, and it intrigued him. He cornered her whenever he could, by the lockers or in the hallways, and flashed his best smile in an attempt to win her over. He managed to get her phone number and had blown it up with hundreds of texts. When he found out her address, he'd become even more relentless, discarding gifts outside her door. He didn't care about her father's possible wrath. For him, Allison became his ultimate conquest, an all-consuming obsession. He thought he was doing her a favor. He was Bryce Kirkland, the big man on campus, the golden boy. He was rich, handsome, and popular. Girls would throw themselves off a cliff for a chance to be with him. He's an asshole, Allison had confided during our private conversations. It's like he doesn't even know the meaning of no. In the past few months, we had gotten closer than I had ever dreamed possible, as close as we could with a wooden fence dividing us. We had a lot more in common than our taste in music. We both liked the same shows, books, and movies. There was something about how her eyes would light up and she would wave her hands about in exaggerated gestures that made my heart swell. She had ached to talk about her interest with someone else for so long. She'd used the excuse of gardening to slip out and engage in hushed conversations at the side of the house, beyond her father's prying eyes. I swallowed. This sounds kind of creepy, Allison. You should really tell someone about this. The school? Maybe your dad? At the mere mention of her father, Allison's throat tightened. I don't like him, but I don't want him to end up in a shallow grave, she muttered. We laughed, but deep down, we both knew it wasn't an impossible thought. Toby, she sighed. I've dealt with guys like Bryce before. They give up, eventually, usually after they meet my dad. Her slender fingers clutched the staked edge of the fence, inches away from my grazing knuckles. It's just so nice to have someone to vent all this about, too. You're a good friend, Toby. You know that? I couldn't dispel the sick feeling inside of me, all too aware of my own hypocrisy. I wanted her the same way Bryce did. She was a constant thought, one that hung over my hormone-addled brain. Every day, I wanted to tell her how I really felt about her, but she needed a friend more than anything else. She was so much more than just the girl next door, and I didn't want to destroy what we had built up. So, I pushed those feelings down and tried to ignore them. On a balmy Friday evening, long after school had ended, I retired to my room to play video games. My ears picked up on some discordant sounds, which I realized weren't a part of the sound design, but were coming from outside. Cautiously, I peered out the half-open window and saw two figures struggling in the neighboring driveway. As I squinted closer, I made out Bryce's muscular figure looming over a struggling Allison. Getting really tired of your games. I'm a nice guy, but I have my limits. Bryce's grip tightened on her wrist, wrenching up her arm. Let me go, please. You're hurting me. Just go out with me. Rage flashed across Allison's face, and she slammed her heel down onto the toe of his sneaker, the resulting howl echoing across the street. Fucking teasing bitch! He roared. I dropped the controller and rushed downstairs. I didn't care that Bryce outclassed me by at least 6 inches and 70 pounds of muscles. I knew that I had to help Allison. By the time I burst through the front door, he already had her pinned up against the wall of the house. Before either of us could do anything, Allison arched up with a pained shriek. She staggered back out of Bryce's grasp, holding her head in her hands. Bryce and I could only watch in gaping, open-mouthed horror as her spine folded backwards on itself, far enough that the bony outline of her vertebrae jutted through her stomach. She snapped back into an upright position, spine prickling out through her clothes into the shape of a fin. The material strained to contain her as her body continued to elongate and deform before our very eyes. Her skull swelled up into the shape of a pumpkin, as if it was being inflated with air, so much so that her eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. It pushed her eyes farther apart, and the cartilage of her nose flattened until it was little more than 2 indistinct dots in the center of her grotesquely oversized face. Her mouth split into a horizontal grin, the flesh of her cheeks tearing up to expose her bloody gums and bristling gray teeth. The joints of her knees bent backwards as her legs thickened with veiny muscle that shredded through her modest blue skirt, hoof-like feet bursting out of her shoes. A smaller pair of skinless, vestigial arms unfolded out from her shoulder blades, grasping at the air. Inspecting close, I saw there were 2 gaping, lamprey-like mouths in the middle of both palms. At 16 years old, Bryce was already 6'5", and most other students barely reached his shoulders. But the transformed Allison made him look like a little boy. He stared up, ashen-faced, his lower lip quivering like he was seconds from bursting into tears. The sour smell of urine-soaked denim tinged the air. She lunged, without any hesitation or mercy, hoisting him in the air with just one hand. He struggled and cried out, but her eyes were purely animal. The smaller arms clamped onto him, hands splayed flat against his chest. His dangling legs grew limp as she slowly exsanguinated him. He seemed to age 80 years in under 2 minutes, his muscles deflating in elasticated folds of skin hanging over his collar. The flesh of his arms plumped as they siphoned the vital fluids from his body. Even the color vanished from his hair, his brown hair tinged snow white. Once she had her fill, she dropped him to the ground, where he remained motionless. After what felt like an eternity of watching, my muscles unfroze and I took a step backwards, only for a loud twig to crack. Those same sunken yellow eyes that had watched the light fade from Bryce's now turned to face me. She leapt over the fence, the impact of her massive body scattering wooden fragments all over our front yard. Her shadow encased me where I stood under her, saliva dripping down from her jaws and soaking into my scalp. I held my hands out towards her, neck lowering between my shoulders, trying to show that I wasn't a threat. Allison. The sound of her name caused her eyes to widen. It was the glimmer of recognition that filled me with hope. There was still some shred of her left, trapped inside that monstrous body, and I knew I had to reach it. Allison, I went on. I know you don't want to do this. This isn't you. She gave a curious chirr, all former hostility erased as she bent her oversized head down to me. The sheer size of her made me take an involuntary step back. Despite what she had done, I didn't feel afraid. This was the girl I had shared countless laughs with, who had expanded my world every time we talked. Even when she was like this, it still didn't change the feelings I had for her. It's okay, Allison. I won't hurt you. My trembling fingers edged forwards towards her black talons. She let out a high-pitched clicking sound as her hand moved outwards towards mine. Without any murderous intent, she had exhibited towards Bryce. Suddenly, she was pulled backwards as another presence tackled her from behind, clambering up her tall form. Under the blinkering streetlights, I realized it was Allison's father. His long white coat flapped out behind him as he wrapped his arms around her thick neck as she tried to buck him off. But he managed long enough to stick a syringe into a bulging vein just above her collarbone, injecting her with a tar-black fluid. The effect was instantaneous. Her rage subsided, arms hanging limp at her bony sides. Both bodies crashed into the grass as she reverted into her smaller human body. I rushed her, pulling her over onto her side, with only the near, invisible rise and fall of her ribcage being the only indication of life. Her father glared at me, still panting from the exertion. You, he growled. So this is how I would die, I thought to myself. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable gunshot. But instead of violence, he pointed toward the open door of the adjacent house. Get her inside as soon as possible, and make sure she's insulated. I'll take care of the body. He pushed his face close to mine, his cold breath trickling over my skin. If you try anything, I'll take care of you too. He gritted out through his clenched teeth. I wasn't about to test his bluff, instead bobbing my head as I pulled off my sweater and wrapped it around Allison's body. I lifted her up and carried her inside the house. The inside of the house was far from the prison I'd imagined it to be. The walls were a neutral, creamy beige that were almost bare aside from a few picture frames hung there. After entering the living room, I stumbled around for the switch in the darkness afforded by the heavy, drawn blackout curtains. As I laid Allison down onto the couch, I noticed the thick medical books scattered across the oak coffee table, most of them displaying passages on human anatomy and genetics. A torn piece of paper was tucked in between the pages of one. Even though I knew better, I opened it to peer at the jointed notes scrawled across into it. Transformation's getting more severe. Suppressant's not working. Human cells overridden. Stem cell therapy an option? I closed the book and looked back to Allison, who was still sprawled comatose on the couch. It was hard to believe that she just killed someone. My own teenage troubles paled in comparison to whatever she had been going through. I wondered why she had never confided in me about it. How long had she bottled it up for? Did she think I wouldn't understand, or, God forbid, reject her? I'm sorry, I whispered. The hours we spent there in that room were the longest and most anxious of my life. I kept waiting for an armed SWAT team to break down the door or black-suited men to arrive to take her into custody and erase any memories I had of her. Allison didn't deserve any of this. She just wanted to enjoy life. I wished that I could open a door and throw her into a paradise, one where she'd be safe from all this. Heavy footsteps trudged up the steps and the door unlocked. I leapt in front of Allison, ready to take on whatever came through. Her father gave an unimpressed look when he saw me, his formerly white sleeves now caked with mud. He shoved me out of the way as he leaned over his daughter. He pulled out another needle from his pocket and gave her a second dosage in the neck. I instinctively pulled away from the sight. What is that? I knew those words were a mistake the second they left my mouth. My voiced ignorance seemed to increase his visible dislike of me tenfold. That happens to be the only thing keeping her alive right now, he replied, cold and curt. I refused to be afraid of him. Not what after I'd seen. What is this? I demanded. What's happening to her? He shook his head with a humorless chuckle. He pulled off his spectacles, heavy dark bags under his eyes. I've been trying to figure that out for the past 15 years, he muttered. He paced beside his daughter, his hands tucked behind his back and eyes never leaving her. It's been that way since she was a child. I've been trying to keep it in check, but the serum is losing effectiveness. The other side, it's too strong. It's not her fault. She can't control it. But I've never seen her behave like that, in that state when you spoke to her. I was sure that she was going to kill you, but she didn't. It was like how her mother and I used to. He stopped himself before he could reveal any more, affixing his stoic mask back on. If you know what's good for you, then you won't breathe a word of this to anyone. His face faltered mid-threat as he looked down at his daughter. He stroked her hair before planting a gentle kiss on her forehead. Please. His voice was quieter now. For her sake. I nodded. I won't, sir. I promise. By the time Bryce's face was plastered across countless missing posters, Allison and her father were long gone, having resettled in another state, far from the suspicion of others. Don't come looking for me, she told me. I don't want you to get hurt. It was the last thing she said before she left. She couldn't even look into my eyes, her gaze fixed to the ground. She was ashamed that I'd seen her in that form, one she and her father had tried to hide from the world. He hadn't devised those rules as a way of protecting her from others, but rather to protect others from her. She never left my mind, not even when I finished high school and headed into college, and even after graduating as a fully fledged adult. Eventually, I couldn't keep it anymore. I had to know. Allison, wherever you might be now, or even if you're reading this, I hope that you're safe. I don't care what you are. I'm not afraid of you. I never was.